trying to figure out. There we go. Okay, good. I couldn't see myself for a second, but doing something new in a new place. I know lighting might be a little poor. Let's see if that's better. There we go. Just hanging out with the girlfriend on a lazy Sunday. But I know you are not here to know about my personal business, but instead you are here to talk about. I'm here to tell you guys about my first ever FCS stats top 25 poll. And first off, I want to thank the gentleman, Mr. Craig Haley, for giving me the opportunity to not just have a say into the, I guess, how the FCS season is shaped, but also just to just learn more about just what a beautiful subdivision and beautiful level of football FCS is. Because already in crafting my poll, I have learned so much about these teams, and I am just so excited for the FCS season to unfold. Uh, I should say before I start that, excuse me, just had some wings. But before I start, that the FCS is an amazing brand of football with everything that's happened in conference realignment. The FCS has regional rivalries. They have tradition. The Ivy League, the Patriot League, the CAA, the Missouri Valley Conference has time-tested rivalries. Everything you want in college football is in the FCS, and it's cheap. A lot of these conferences in the group of five, they require cable subscriptions. Just get ESPN Plus. You are good to go watching a lot of these FCS conferences too. And even some FCS conferences, have some free streams as well. So it is affordable. It is fun to watch, and there is plenty of tradition. I'm a Holy Cross fan, and I will always brag about Holy Cross's appearance in, I think, the 1945 Orange Bowl or 46. I'm slacking, but I'm excited to do this. This will be a weekly thing on all three networks that you're following right now. This will be available on the SamShady on the Shady Sports Network Twitter page, available live on the hardware page, available live on the Shady Sports YouTube page. I'm just excited to share my thoughts and talk about my poll each week. So without further ado, I feel like I should just watch the chat stream. Let me see if I can pull that up. But without further ado, I will get this thing started and hear like the Black Eyed Peas. Very excited for some discussion and very excited to learn too, for you guys to help me learn as well about the FCS. We're just learning from each other. So let me see. Nope, nothing. I guess I'm not going live anyway. But anyway, so first off, I'm going to share my screen and reveal my top 5. So let me share my screen. There we go. Okay, that looks like good enough. So as you can see, here is my top 5 without spoiling much else. We got South Dakota State, Montana State, North Dakota State, William and Mary, and Furman for the top 5. And I feel like I might have diverted from a little bit of some of the polls. I believe some polls or a lot of polls may have had South Dakota State and North Dakota State 1 and 2. And for me, I just think that the outcome for the Dakota Marker Championship game, I think it was pretty decisive, really. Montana State as well. They returned so much talent, especially we'll start with South Dakota State. South Dakota State has so much returning talent. They have 2 multiple All-Americans on the defensive line. Adam Bach at linebacker is a legitimate Buck Buchanan Award semifinalist. Finalist. I don't even have to mention from the offensive standpoint, just the wealth of options they have. Mark Gronowski comes back for a third year as a starter. Well, third year as a starter. You have Isaiah Davis, who is one of the most draft-ready running backs there is in the country. You have the Yankee Twins. The Yankee Twins came back. They were invited to the Hula Bowl last year, but the Yankee Twins are back. So South Dakota State looks to go back-to-back this year. Of course, they got North Dakota State in the way. But number 2, we have Montana State. And for all my FBS fans watching, remember Sean Chambers? I'm sure you guys all do from Wyoming, the quarterback that outdueled Kelly Bryant in his debut back in 2019 for Missouri. Sean Chambers and Wyoming beat them at home, but they returned Sean Chambers, a quarterback, Tommy Mellott, 2-headed quarterback scheme. It works. A lot of people say that if you have 2 quarterbacks, you have no quarterbacks. That is just not true at the FCS level, as we've seen with Sacramento State. We'll get to later on. We'll get to later on. But Montana State, too, has just a wealth of options at quarterback. The passing game looks way more improved, too. I know the passing game was a bit of a crutch last year because they averaged less than 200 yards per game, but they have 3 FBS transfers incoming. The only thing is with Montana State is the Big Sky, as you'll see with my poll, is just loaded this year with great teams. I think they're even more loaded than the Missouri Valley Football Conference this year. While I still think the MVFC is a better conference, the Big Sky will definitely have more parity, and Montana State will struggle this year. I think. I mean, they won't be as dominant, I think, but they have such great potential. This year. Going on to number 3, got North Dakota State, and I'm not writing off the Bison. I would be silly to do that. But North Dakota State, they have some changes this year, but they're always going to be experienced. They're always going to have depth. They're always going to have that winning tradition that they bring from Fargo. Cam Miller looks to improve as a quarterback. They have Tamarick Williams. They have their 4 top pass catchers. There's questions in the secondary, and of course, everyone knows that they lost Cody Mock, who was pretty much a viral hit, during Senior Bowl week and during the draft process, and Hunter Lipke, the best fullback in the country, but never write off North Dakota State. Coming in at number 4, this one may surprise people, but I expect big things from William & Mary this year. William & Mary is, again, a much more experienced team again this year. William & Mary is they look to be pretty much the top dog, I think, in the Colonial Athletic Association, which is, I won't say much weaker, but losing James Madison is a hit for that. It is definitely a loss for that conference, and the replacements really aren't up to the level that James Madison was. It may take a couple of years for Campbell to catch up, Hampton as well. So it's gonna take some time. NC North Carolina A&T as well. It's gonna take some time for them to adjust. We saw Hampton have some growing pains moving from the Big South to the CAA, but nonetheless, William & Mary plays a tough brand of football. I genuinely believe William & Mary could survive in the MVFC with how physical they play. They average over 260 yards per game on the ground. They return their 2 top running backs. Darius Wilson is a threat to run as well. He's improving as a passer each year after being the 2021 CAA Rookie of the Year. On defense, this is where the tribe make their money. John Pius and Nate Lynn return. They provide a strong pass rush. Pius was a runner-up for the Buck Buchanan last year, and he may win it this year. The schedule's favorable in the CAA, like I said, with top dogs like Delaware losing a lot of depth. Richmond as well. Richmond returns 13 starters. Not as great a number. I mean, Richmond, you'll hear a lot later on down the line in my poll, but Richmond as well loses some depth. So William & Mary looks like a legitimate threat to be a seed again this year. Excuse me. Moving on to round out the top 5, we got Furman. I like Furman's potential, I think, more than Samford, because even though Michael Hires is arguably the best quarterback in the FCS, Furman is powered by their defense. They return 10 starters on defense, and you can't fight that, especially in a league like the SoCon, where a lot of teams play tough ball, where you have the Citadel, of course, running the triple option. You got East Tennessee State, who likes to run the ball usually. You just got so many teams that play a tough brand of football. VMI, I know VMI went 1-10, but they're running a pro style. Furman fits that conference well. And, of course, Tyler Huff will improve. I know it hurts losing Ryan Miller, All-American tight end. Best of luck to him in the pros. But they also return Dominic Roberto on offense, a 1,000-yard rusher. So this team is built to play tough football, and I'm excited to see what they have in store. So I have Furman rounding out my top 5, and it took everything inside of me. To not put Holy Cross into the top 5. But you're going to hear about Holy Cross soon. So let me go back to my face. So that rounds out my top 5 so far. Coming up next, we have, pick 6 through 10. So I'm going to share those again. I'm going to share my poll again. I know this is an inefficient system to do. So going back to my vote. So going down from number 6 to number 10, we have Samford, Holy Cross, Incarnate Word, Montana, and Idaho. So starting off with Samford, Michael Hires. Samford's system is such a great offensive system. Michael Hires comes back, is one of the best quarterbacks, if not the best in FCS. And really, it's going to be 1 and 2 in the SoCon between Furman and Samford. I just gave the edge to Furman because they have more talent returning on defense, more talent returning overall. But Michael Hires is an absolute game breaker on offense, and arguably, like, Samford would have been way more competitive against North Dakota State in the playoffs had Hires stayed healthy. I'm excited to see what they do. It's like I think the dynamic in the FCS is interesting because you have the big two, like you do in FBS, how FBS has the Big Ten and the SEC. But there's always a fight. There's always conferences jockeying for the third best conference in FCS, which you know, like in FBS. In the FCS, you have the Big Sky, the CAA, or the big, or I guess, sorry, the CAA and the MVFC as the two best conferences, and then you have the Big Sky, you have the SoCon jockeying for that third spot. And I legitimately think this year that the SoCon, with the amount of talent that's in that conference, has a legitimate argument to be the third best conference in FCS. Going on to number 7, Holy Cross will likely be the most controversial team in the polls this year. And I'll tell you why. This team went 11-0 last year, but yet they just barely snuck in, getting the 8th seed in the FCS playoffs, getting that bye week, earning that respect too, going all the way to the quarterfinals and beating New Hampshire on the way, and honestly, that game was hardly in doubt throughout the way, getting a hard-fought win over CAA school, which is always a fight for the Patriot League to get wins like that. But I got Holy Cross at 7 because part of my formulation in my head is like, I just don't know if the Crusaders can beat teams like this head to head on a daily basis. Like I honestly just don't know, to be honest with you. So that's part of my rationale for Holy Cross. But Holy Cross, they return so much talent as a Worcester native. I love the Crusaders. Jalen Coker returns. Jalen Coker returns a receiver. He caught the infamous game-winning touchdown against Sacred Heart in 2021. He's on the Senior Bowl watch list, I think, or he's been on Senior Bowl Small School Saturday along with Matthew Sluka, who is a legitimate Walter Payton finalist. He might even be in the top 3 or 4 when it's all said and done. Jalen Coker is also on the Shrine Bowl 1000. You have Jacob Dobbs returning on defense, a Buck Buchanan, probably finalist as well. Excuse me, gassy after those wings. But Holy Cross has so much talent. I think their big statements this year that will truly put them in a better position in the playoff is if they beat Boston College on the road on September 9th, and Army. Army is interesting too because they'll play Army and they match up well against Army. They and don't sleep on the fact that Army is running a new offense. I know I say this as an Army fan. Army's running a new offense, and Holy Cross has a defense to compete with Army. So if Holy Cross can go 10-1 with a win against either of those schools, I mean, I would bump them up to the 5th or 6th seed. Going on to Incarnate Word. Incarnate Word loses. There's a lot of turnover for Incarnate Word, but they just get so much FBS talent back, including Zach Calzada, which if Lindsey Scott can run that system amazingly and get 60 touchdowns last year, I believe Zach Calzada, the sky's the limit for Zach Calzada like it was for Lindsey and Scott. They also return their 3, 4, and 5 receivers, which is great for Incarnate Word. They get so much FBS talent from the transfer portal, and really the Southland doesn't have much competition. So I think they'll be able to breeze through the Southland with the exception of Southeast Louisiana, which will be a test. So that being said, I have Incarnate Word at number 8. At number 9 and number 10, Montana and Idaho, which I think this one was tough for me because the Big Sky, like I said, there is so much parity in the Big Sky, so much potential for these teams. While Montana State is a true top dog this year, there'll be plenty of teams to round out the playoff field from the Big Sky. Montana returns a lot of talent. Montana is always going to play strong defense. Idaho is a fascinating team because Idaho made the playoffs last year. They're a team that's just getting older and more experienced, and the sky really is the limit. They have Giovanni McCoy, of course, last year's Jerry Rice Award winner, Hayden Hatton and Jermaine Jackson both had over 1,000 receiving yards, but there's plenty of questions on the defense. There's only 6 returning starters, and so honestly, it's kind of hard to say whether this defense would stop Montana State easily, or Montana, or Sacramento State, or UC Davis, especially with UC Davis returning a lot of talent on the offensive side of the ball. So that is numbers 6 through 10 on my poll. Heading over to numbers 11 through 15 on the poll. Excited to share this with everyone. There we go. Don't want to spoil too much. I want to do this sequentially. We have Weber State. So with Weber State, my thing with the Big Sky, it's just too close to call. It is just so much talent in this conference. Weber State, they have questions at quarterback, but a strong run game and a defense anchored by All-American Winston Reed and All-American Maxwell Anderson. Reed at linebacker, Anderson at cornerback. They really anchor this team, and they're really fit to stop teams like Idaho, like Montana State. So I wouldn't be surprised if they pull an upset along the way and build a strong playoff resume. There's just so much talent in the Big Sky. It's really exciting to watch. Um, this is just a team that has plenty of experience, and I think the Big Sky will be that. I think in a tight battle with the SoCon for being that third best conference. So going on to number 12, Southeastern Louisiana, really the other team in the Southland that's really jockeying for power, which they could overtake UIW with the turnover because turnover can go one of two ways, where it completely flips the season they had last year for UIW, or it just boosts or just brings them to a new level with the amount of talent that they have that they can kind of resurrect the careers of. So Southeastern Louisiana returns 6 or 11 top tacklers on defense. And there's questions at quarterback. There's another void to fill. They do have plenty of FBS talent coming in at quarterback, including Cameron Cooper, who was a 4-star recruit and played at Hawaii last year as well. There's also questions at running back as well. And, but the Southland is one of the weaker conferences. They've been decimated by conference realignment through the WAC A-Sun experiment. So they should be able to get an at-large bid if they breeze through the conference and I think lose a close game to UIW, lose their FBS game kind of close, and that'll be that. Sacramento State has a lot of turnover and questions at quarterback as well, but they do return a lot of talent on offense. But it'll be interesting to see if they compete in the Big Sky, especially out in California, where I think UC Davis has a legitimate potential to overtake the Hornets. But I put Sacramento State at 13. North Dakota is interesting too because North Dakota is in the shadow, of course, of their Dakota foes. You have Tommy Schuster returning for his third year. Bo Belquist leads an experienced group of pass catchers for the top 5 tacklers returning. This is a team that will eat up on the lower level of the NPFC, but for them to really be taken seriously, they got to win games like the Buffalo Nickel game against North Dakota State. They got to beat South Dakota State. They got to beat the top echelon of that league to be taken seriously. I don't doubt they'll make the playoff, but I also don't think they're better than the teams above them. UC Davis as well at 15. This is a team that, they're 6-5 last year, but Dan Hawkins is hitting his groove out there with the Aggies. Miles Hastings comes back after throwing 3,000 yards. The experience factor at quarterback is there, something that's not there for Sacramento State that puts them kind of close to them in the polls. 7 of their top 11 tacklers return. They have a wealth of receiver talent, and they have great pass catching running backs as well. So it's just in the run smooth. So I got the Aggies going in at 15 on my poll. So coming up next, and 16 through 20 as we round out this poll, which I'm having trouble scrolling a little bit, so I don't want to spoil everything. So here is where the hot takes start to form. So we have at 16, I got North Carolina Central. I got the North Carolina Central Eagles out here. And I think this is the team that can beat a lot of teams in the CAA. I know last year we saw them travel to Durham in the Durham Bowl, and they defeated New Hampshire pretty easily. Davius Richard looks like a legitimate Walter Payton Award finalist. He's my favorite right now for the Black College Football Hall of Fame Player of the Year or HBCU Player of the Year. He is just such a dynamic quarterback. I mean, North Carolina Central returns a lot of talent. And, honestly, they can beat, I think, the CAA teams I have listed here and the one Ivy League team I've listed here below. Going on to Richmond. Richmond is a team that has a strong defense. They return many returns in the front 7, but I just don't think they're, as elite as, say, William and Mary is, because William and Mary return so much talent. Richmond returns some talent, but they'll be able to skate by and get and kind of be like North Dakota, but in the CAA, where they feast on that lower echelon of teams in the CAA. So that's my opinion there on Richmond. They returned Tristan Wheeler, two all CAA defensive ends into the pass rush. So that is definitely a huge gain for them. Coming in at 18, I have my first and only swag team. This may be controversial, but I did not rank Jackson State, and I know that haters are going to come my way for this one. But Florida A&M, I think, will be able to burst through the glass ceiling and I think overtake Jackson State. Of course, we'll see week 1 during the Orange Blossom Classic whether they do overtake the Tigers. But this is a team last year that went 9-2. They lost, of course, to Jackson State handily. They were very competitive against North Carolina despite being decimated. Excuse me. And then they just breeze through the rest of their SWAC competition. The only problem with Florida A&M's schedule that may cause them problems in the polls in the future, which kind of contributes to them being ranked outside the top 15 for me, is the fact that they play two non-Division One games, including against Lincoln, California, which Lincoln, California is a team that's not even in the NCAA. It's not a great mark, but other schools are playing non-Division One schools. South Dakota State is playing, I think, Western Oregon, so I can't even get too mad at that. But I think Florida A&M burst through the glass ceiling this year. They return a lot of talent. Going on to number 19, I have New Hampshire. New Hampshire has Dylan Lobby at running back, of course. Dylan Lobby setting, I think, it's an unofficial record, but they say that he set the record for all-purpose yards. They return their quarterback this year, but the same thing with Richmond. I think they'll benefit from feasting on the lower echelon of CAA, but we saw last year head-to-head. North Carolina Central dominated them last year in the Durham Bowl. This is the team, and then of course Holy Cross. This is the team that I think will just make the playoffs, and that'll be that. They'll have a strong record in a strong conference, and people will take that for what it is right now, and that's that. So I have them being a playoff team. Going on to Yale. This is hard because I only have one Ivy League team. The top of the Ivy League is very interesting, and there's a lot of competitive parity there with Yale, Princeton, and Harvard, the big three, HYP. But Yale returns a lot of experience on defense. Nolan Grooms is just he's experienced at quarterback. Yale always seems to have very good quarterbacks. Very good dual threat quarterbacks that just stay there and start for years upon years. I'm thinking about Kurt Rollins right now for Yale. And of course, Yale looks good this year, and they're my favorite for the Ivy League. The one thing for me is Harvard lost some skill players. Princeton lost some good skill players, especially Andre Yoshavas. That's the person that comes to mind for Yale. For Princeton, even though Princeton has a great defense, but I think this is Yale's year again to break through and win the Ivy League. So rounding out my top 25 poll, thank you for coming along this journey with me. We have number 21, Rhode Island. Rhode Island is one of the best stories of the 2023 season because here's a team. I'm going to pull my inner Chris Collinsworth. So here's a team that has not made the playoffs since Ronald Reagan's first presidential term. I think it was 1985 was the last time they made the playoffs. But this is a team that went 7-4 last year. They return their quarterback. They return Kasim Hill. Remember Kasim Hill, people? The quarterback that started for Maryland against Texas back in 2017 and just worked the Longhorns before getting hurt. Kasim Hill is back. Rhode Island return. They lose their running back, I think, this year. But again, this is a team that went 7-4 last year. They're equipped to beat the lower level of CAA teams. Excuse me, gee, I'm getting so excited. But they lost to Delaware last year. That's a game that I see them winning this year, with Delaware losing a lot of talent, especially at the quarterback position. They lost to William & Mary, it's expected, but I think they can flip on New Hampshire this year, especially with that game being at home this year. They benefit from that game being at home this year. So I have Rhode Island making the playoffs for their first time since 1985, which I'm checking right now. The last time they made the playoffs was, 1985. They only have 3 playoff appearances ever. So FCS football, Chicago Cubs will make the playoffs. And so I won't go into too much detail. I know there's a big shocker out at number 25. So there's a big shocker at number 25. But I'll get to that later. Number 22, Southeast Missouri State ran through the Big South OVC last year. And this year too, the Big South OVC, I don't put too much stock in that alliance. They'll be dominant this year. I think in the Big South OVC, they went 9-3 last year. Mercer is interesting. I think Mercer can finally break through the glass ceiling and make their first playoff appearance ever. We've been waiting for, it seems like, an eternity for them. They've been on the cusp, but they have never quite made it because, this year, even though they lose Fred Payton, Carter Peavy returns with a good amount of experience, started a couple of games during the pandemic season, including a game against Army. So I saw Carter Peavy live at West Point. Was a good time. But Carter Peavy returns to experience, but they return 2 of the best receivers in the FCS. One of them with 1,000 yards receiving. His name escapes me right now. So I think Mercer can break through and make their first playoff one, especially if they upset one of Furman or Sanford this year in conference play. And then number 24, we got St. Thomas. St. Thomas at 10-1, and week 3, Harvard's first game, they have a real chance to make a statement to the country, beating Harvard in Boston. Legitimate chance to make a great first statement to the country. Harvard will be playing their first game. We saw Harvard come out flat last year in their first game of the season, where Merrimack had 2 weeks to play, on their shoulder, or I guess in the bag or whatever. I'm losing what expression to say, but they had 2 weeks of play already at Harvard. They took Harvard to overtime, and it was either overtime or it was close in the fourth quarter, but Harvard barely escaped with a home victory against Merrimack. So the same thing could happen to a much better St. Thomas team that went 10-1. The only reason I have a 10-1 team ranked so low is because it's not disrespect to the Pioneer Football League, but St. Thomas's one FCS non-conference game. They played against Southern Utah. They looked really weak in that game. They lost 44-13, and it was just an ugly sight for that team. So I got St. Thomas until they can prove me wrong in the Harvard game. I have them at 24, but they'll probably be bumped out if they lose a lot in the Harvard game. But they might find their way late in the season. We'll see if they run through playoff play. I don't even know if they're eligible for the playoffs. So, and then to round out my top 25, I got the Howard Bison. The Howard Bison this year, the defending MEAC co-champs at 4-1. This is a team that showed a lot of fight and a lot of pluckiness throughout the year. They were down by one score against Harvard at halftime. They lost to Yale. They fought back against Yale. They almost beat Yale at the Yale Bowl. Excuse me. All this talking nonstop is affecting me right now. But they returned Quentin Williams, arguably one of the most underrated quarterback in FCS football. I'll say it right now. Quentin Williams is so underrated. People aren't talking about Quentin Williams enough. I know they went 5-6 last year, but I just wanted to mix things up because this is a team that could run the table in the MEAC. The MEAC, as I always talk with my friend Dwayne from the Yard HBCU Sports, the MEAC is a 5-game year. It's a 5-game season. We always talk about it. They return a lot of depth in that backfield. On defense, they're getting stronger, honestly. So, I mean, Howard, team to watch out for. We'll see this year how they play in the MEAC. But that concludes my top 25 reveal. Be doing this each week, and I just love the discussion. I'm going to learn more about the subdivision, and I take this responsibility seriously. And I just hope that you join me on this journey throughout the year. So, as always, peace, love, and soul. Let's talk about it, people. And hey, we're less than 3 weeks from the start of the season. Everyone, peace, love, and soul.